Everyone has their own flood of images when you hear the word Iraq. Chances are your mind goes something like this or like this. So what is life like in Iraq today?
With us now from Uzbekistan.
This is Hollie Mckay in Kabul.
Mazar-Sharif,
Taliban capital of Kandahar.
At a camp in the edges of Kabul.
Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan.
Iran, Turkey, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, also Burma, Russia, East Africa.
Sat through military tribunals and interviewed hundreds of soldiers, civilians, and government officials before, during, and after the horrors of war.
We have to understand the way that they think. I've spent much of my adult life as a writer, journeying across Iraq. And of course, the memories of war and destruction still weigh heavy in my mind. Throughout the fight against ISIS, from 2014 to 2019, I spent a lot of time with the Iraqi forces and also with the Kurdish Peshmerga forces from the northern part of the country.
We'll have to leave that.
The military aspect of being a war reporter is what we call the bang bang, focusing on the conflict, the weapons used, the incoming and the outgoing, and also the lives of the soldiers. But what I remember most about those years are the civilians caught in the crossfire, the ordinary people thrust into the most extraordinary situations, losing their homes and their houses, having to bury those they love most in the world, and unsure, day by day, how they're going to get through. But when the conflicts are considered over, the people and places fall from the headlines. So I wanted to go back to Baghdad to see what life was really like in the supposed time of peace. On the surface, it's a very different Baghdad than the one I remember. Hi, this is Hollie Mckay, and I am in Baghdad, which of course is where Only Cry for the Living is largely set. So it's really cool to come back here and see how things have changed. You can travel pretty freely through the streets, and as my fixer and fellow journalist and good friend Enes told me, it's been more than 2 years since a suicide bombing. That in itself is something of a victory.
I did later 3 months.
The markets are generally peaceful places, and as one young couple told me, just simply being able to go out past 6 p.m, not subject to curfew, is a victory as well. And of course, I also made use of the nightlife. And then of course, there is the notorious Sada City, which, for better or worse, hasn't really changed. Now I'm at the Kasfazan Sufi Mosque, and as you can see, it's Thursday prayers. It's a little community gathering. So for much of this week, I've really been looking at how Baghdad has changed over the past 20 years. Certainly right now, there is a lot more stability than there has been in the past. People ask a lot about the Daesh threat. In Baghdad, it's pretty calm right now, but certainly in parts of Ramadi, Fallujah, there is still pockets of Daesh, unfortunately. But the trials of alleged ISIS fighters remain ongoing. Most are quickly sentenced to death or life in prison.
And one thing you probably won't read about in the news are people like little Layla here. They were babies, now school-aged children, born to ISIS fathers, and essentially rendered stateless and ostracized from the broader community. Thank goodness for local activists like Hannah Edouard, who opens her home, her wallet, and her heart to help these many struggling wives and children. Moreover, the destruction across the country feels never-ending and still hasn't been rebuilt. People still don't have homes and nowhere to go. And even though the ISIS threat is diminished, there of course is the Tehran tentacles and the growing influence of Iran in Iraq. Everywhere you go, there are billboards and tributes to Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy chairman of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Committee backed by Iran. These two figures were killed by the Trump administration in early 2020. And while it might be projected on the streets as being a sad affair, many Iraqis that I talk to are secretly glad that it happened. And I couldn't leave Baghdad without traveling to Babylon, also known as Hilla, just outside of Baghdad. It is where civilization began. It is the cradle of civilization, also known as Mesopotamia. Inside the palace that Saddam Hussein built for himself is still evidence that the Americans were there. But the artifact that struck me most was this one, a tablet from 710 BC in Khoraspad, also known as modern-day Mosul. Notice the heads being brought to the king, and down in the bottom right-hand corner, civilians weeping. So how much has really changed? Nevertheless, Iraqis are resilient people, including this art school, which has been around since 1968 and survived the Saddam dictatorship and every other terrorist threat since then. A lot of the young students have now taken Western names. This is Sally leading the class on Kurdish dance. And as I step out into the burning midday sun, I remember how much I had strangely missed the ancient, unpredictable, bloodied and beautiful capital of Baghdad. The scent of exhaust, sweat, gunpowder and the rings of salt that defined so much of its collective memory.
I think